I think it's fair to say Mario and Luigi Brothership is packed with content, to the point you could even argue it's maybe a little too much. One thing I feel is missing though is a sort of bestiary of all enemies, where you can see who you fought and whether you've seen them all, kinda like the Pokédex or what Paper Mario has always had. I don't know why, but Mario and Luigi has never really had one, so how about we change that? I'm gonna take you on a trip through Concordia past every single enemy. Also, keep in mind that this video will contain spoilers, as it is impossible to cover every enemy without mentioning some later events and bosses. But that isn't where we're gonna start, of course. We begin with the first enemy you ever face, all the way back on Conductor Island. The Seedo, which is brand new. Seeing as you'll have to face this foe without even getting the bros back together, they're not exactly the most challenging and can be defeated and countered using nothing more than jumping. That said, you can counter their coconut throw attack, a move that may suggest they are seeds of a coconut tree. Later in the game, several more variants are introduced of this species, which is actually quite rare in Brothership. Past Mario and Luigi games did this a ton, but Brothership has relatively little variations and instead just throws a ton of new enemies at you, although I am not counting the versions under the influence of Gloam when I say that. The Seedo R is a pretty classic stronger version though, now entirely green, while also obviously hitting harder with the same attacks. They're also capable of boosting the speed of team members, a move that mirrors what another Seedo variant can do, the Hydro Seedo. These are fittingly blue, have a little dewdrop on their leaves, and replace their standard charge attack with a spinning one that now targets both Mario and Luigi. Similarly to the Seedo R, they're also capable of helping out fellow enemies through the magic of healing in their case. Another enemy that I don't think is technically related to the Seedo species, but also does not feel entirely separated either looking at their initial design, is the Seedluza. These are incredibly unique creatures in general, since they are the only Gloam based enemy to not just be a normal monster influenced by the dark substance. There is no normal variant of the Seedluza, and yet it is classified as a Gloam based enemy in-game, as shown by the Gloam Buster achievement counting them towards a total of 150. While you could of course consider the Seedo to be the normal variant, and their designs are clearly similar, standard Gloam Seedos also exist, so there has to be more involved here in the creation of Reclusa's most common foot soldier. While these guys initially don't really attack at all, and even flat out flee on occasion, attacking them will have you quickly finding out they have a ridiculously high defense. Before you ever get the chance to chip away at their health however, they will burrow into the ground and turn into an enormous flower. An easy way to defeat them before that happens is by using the surprise Iron Ball plug, which ignores their defenses and defeats them in one blow. As you can see from their design as a Gloam infested flower, Seedluzas definitely aren't supposed to be coconut trees, which is fitting considering they don't use the coconut throwing move of their distant cousins either. In their flower form, they instead attack by causing roots containing dangerous bulbs to sprout from the ground or quickly charge at one of the brothers. We turn back the clock to the start of the game now for the first foe found on Rumbla Island, the Guard Arm. Despite preceding the bros obtaining the hammer, they feel designed to be the prime introductory enemy for the slightly more in-depth combat, teaching players how both the jump and the hammer work, both from a counter perspective as well as how some enemies are immune to either of the two attacks. While we don't know this for certain, it does appear likely they are aligned with Gorumbla, who may even be part of this species himself. The visual similarities are there, although the hand and body color are swapped, and they both have the same initial goal, which is destroying the art on Rumbla Island. Although while Gorumbla eventually changes his ways, the guard arms of the island do not. In battle, they also have comparable moves and tactics, particularly regarding the blocking of attacks using their hands. No matter whether your next destination is Twisty or Rainforest Island, you will find yourself encountering one of the two shoot enemies next, the Parachute and the Bumbleshoot. What is really odd about this pair is that they are virtually identical, save for the Bumbleshoot being ever so slightly stronger, making you wonder why this one was given its own unique name instead of just Parachute R. Would have also removed any confusion regarding the variant that flies, since, you know, in Mario games, the prefix para usually indicates an enemy can fly, and while the Parachute definitely can, the Bumbleshoot can as well, so yeah, confusing all around. Now, obviously its name is more of a reference to a parachute, judging by how it attacks, but that's beside the point. Found alongside the Parachute on Rainforest Island is the Invis-Lizard. Love how that rolls off the tongue, by the way. These little monsters aren't just any lizard though, they're chameleons, meaning they can turn invisible when attacking, although their cute little taps on the ground help make sure you time your jumps right. They can also stick out their long tongues to attack, which is actually an attack you cannot counter, despite it kinda looking like you can. Learned that the hard way. Invisilizards also have an R variant, which is found in the deserts of All Sand Island, which corresponds with real-life chameleons who can be found in both jungles and deserts. More new enemies can be found on Twisty Island, particularly the Sorobor and their mother, father, big sister or brother, the Big Sorobor. It shouldn't be a surprise that these enemies are boars, particularly ones that anger very easily and speed up their attack patterns when enraged. While their larger and ever so slightly stronger cousin, the Big Sorobor, cannot be encountered in the overworld, they can still appear in battle as they're sometimes just there when engaging a mini Sorobor. That actually means the Big Sorobor is the only enemy in the entire game that can only be found in a battle and not outside of it. All other species appear in the overworld as well. While we have so far exclusively covered new enemies in Brothership, we find some returning faces when we visit the first Great Lighthouse. Although, one is a little complicated, but let's get the easy one out of the way first. The Capnap made its debut in Dream Team and shows that at least some creatures are found in both Concordia and PEO Island, which doesn't sound like very interesting information until you realize the game makes abundantly clear that the Mushroom Kingdom and Concordia share absolutely nothing. Every single Koopa, Toad and Goomba found in this game is a Mushroom Kingdom citizen, as seen in the ending. So the fact that Capnaps can be found in both alternate worlds, for lack of a better word, is noteworthy. The trickier enemy in a similar situation is the Spikely, which took a break of directing movies to appear in Concordia. It is incredibly similar in design to the Forb, a pumpkin-like enemy that's also from Dream Team, and even led plenty of people, me included, to believe this was a redesign of the enemy as opposed to a new species. Hell, even the French localization team was fooled, as they called Spikely Boulet Pin, which is also the name of the Forb. But no, these are separate species apparently, although the fact that in Dream Team you could also find Capnaps and Forbs at the same location does suggest something more is going on here. It's all a little too coincidental, don't you think? Let's get back to some new enemies next, like the one that is actually the first enemy you ever see in-game, the Snapter. Based on how often these birds appear in story events and side quests, and how integral they are to the first half of the game especially, I feel like they have instantly become one of the most high-profile original enemies in the Mario and Luigi series. Not that I expect them to become mainstays or anything, but normal enemies being so often seen in the plot doesn't happen every day. And that extra level of attention can also be seen in their moveset, considering they have access to a total of 6 different moves. 6, that's like 3 times as much as the final boss of the game. And then I haven't even accounted for Mega Snapter, the boss of Ladacoin's Island. Definitely an enemy you can't have exactly missed. That doesn't really apply to the Drillbee, which isn't like hidden or anything, but it is quite unremarkable I'd say, both design-wise and in terms of moveset. Even their R variant was in my experience no challenge whatsoever, and Brothership had no trouble reminding me I'm not particularly good at Mario and Luigi games, so I suggest we move on. Next up is another enemy which is technically new, but clearly tied or inspired by a previous one, the Corrode. This is a metallic rusty variant of the Treevil, an organic tree monster that hails from Bowser's Inside Story, making this quite a big throwback in that regard. That said, beyond the very clear design similarities, the two enemies don't have too much in common beyond just generally throwing with items, although there are a lot of enemies that do that. Like 50% of the Zoc Troopers for example. These are the minions of Zocket's army, implied through hidden logbook entries to not naturally be sentient and recruited, but instead created and given life by the masked villain, who seemingly cares little about their foot soldiers and was planning on shutting them all down after completing their mission. Throughout the game, we encountered 5 different variants. The red Spike Zoc Trooper, the light grey Soccer Rank Trooper, the blue Jet Zoc Trooper, the green Ring Zoc Trooper, and the Helmet Zoc Trooper, which is dark grey under their headwear. Going through each of their attacks would take far too long for what are frankly quite basic moves, but what I do like about these is how some of them are capable of different attacks when certain Zoc Troopers are present. The Ring and Spike variant can team up, for example, for an exclusive attack only they can do together. The title of weirdest enemy in Brothership goes with a landslide victory to the Showerfish of All Sand Island. These have two forms, as the hot desert air will cause them to dehydrate and turn all slim and dried up. What remains ever present, however, is the shower head on their head, which doubles as an angler, and their large lips, which are used for kissing attacks. Whether this unwanted attention beats a Daphne's is a question we must ask Luigi, however. Let's wrap up some more returning phases now, starting with the Ice Sad and Magmad. These piles of snow and lava respectively made their debut in Dream Team, where they are only found in the Dream World, interestingly enough. That said, unlike the Catnap from earlier, these two have undergone some slight design changes, with the spikes on their head to protect against jumping attacks being new. The oldest enemy to make its return in Brothership is the Sharkbone, which first appeared in Superstar Saga, but then didn't resurface until Brothership brought them back in quite remarkable fashion. In this game, they are basically treated as this unbeatable threat, especially during your first visit to All Sand Island, but later on you can not only handle defeating them, there's also a side quest which requires you to. What's interesting though is how completely different this showing is from what we saw in Superstar Saga, where they were strong enemies, sure, but hardly unbeatable, and not really any different from regular enemies. I guess the sharks in Concordia are just born different, or died different, I suppose. Of course, the huge contingent of Bowser's minions who also made the trip to this new world are all returning enemies as well. But since you're probably all more than familiar with these guys, let me just quickly sum them up and leave it at that. You've got Goombas, Koopa Troopas and Paratroopas, Hammer and Fire Bros, Shy Guys, Boos, Spikes, Spinies, Dry Bones, Magikoopas, Piranha Plants and Bob-Ombs. Also noteworthy is that this marks the first title in the series where Ice Bros appear in the main adventure of the game, as they had previously only appeared in the side modes of Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story on 3DS. Alright, back to the new phases, the last few we have left to cover in this video. First, the Foop Fly, which felt really familiar to me somehow and had me digging for a while, but no, it appears to truly be a Brothership original. These enemies are entirely projectile based and really tricky to dodge in the overworld because of it. These two have an R variant that changes up their color from pink to blue. An enemy that I expected to be a lot stronger than it really was the Curl Up, a large armadillo that also kinda looks like a croissant if you ask me. Considering its inspiration, it shouldn't be a surprise it attacks by rolling up in a ball and charging at you, although this is one of the few attacks in the game that will send the targeted brother flying, making them unable to be used for a bit there. They're mostly found on Heat Freeze Island, which to me felt a little out of place if I'm being honest, but okay. Similarly to the Foop Fly, the Palooka also felt familiar to me, but it too is a brand new enemy that's not so subtly based on punching bags, although they pack a pretty strong punch themselves as well. Their charging up attack especially is really strong and can easily take you by surprise, as it's one of the few moves in the game where countering isn't dependent on picking the right moment. Especially with their R variant, that's not a move you want to mess up. Significantly less intimidating, and dangerous as well frankly, is the Milton. I mean, no offense to all the Miltons watching, but this name doesn't really strike much fear. And maybe that was intentional, because this slot machine-like enemy can actually be helpful if it rolls all green on its stones. The reward is coins, so nothing groundbreaking, but still, it's better than a rock to the face. And for the final three enemies, we head to the Solitree, where they, alongside the aforementioned Seed Lusa, can exclusively be found. Let's start with one of the most annoying enemies in the game, the Weeping Trooper, which already hints at what Reclusa will become before it has even happened. This robot is quite a large presence, which combined with the tight hallways it's found in, makes for a scenario that can make it as good as unavoidable. And that caused me quite some frustration in the last part of the game, which I found to take frustratingly long to begin with, but that's a story for another video. The Reclusive is also newly introduced here, being a flying saucer kind of enemy that, as such, resembles enemies we have seen previously as well, like in Partners in Time. Not only does its name further hint at its allegiance with Reclusa, it also establishes that every enemy found in this final area has a design that is very clearly based on wiring and cables. Now, obviously that is a very commonly seen theme throughout the entire game, with the extension core as prime example, but not too many monsters have been seen so far with that design philosophy. It's only the Zoc Troopers really, and then suddenly 4 more in the Solitree. Because yes, the final enemy in the game also clearly follows the dress code, with the Doom Bloom being a mix between a ferocious plant and a cable. Now, I did consider not including this one, since this enemy is by far the most prominent during the final boss segment, but it is pretty clearly not a boss, and I'm willing to bet anyone still watching has either finished the game or doesn't care about spoilers, so let's wrap up the video with the Doom Bloom. For how large a role this enemy ends up playing in the game, its attacks are honestly rather unspectacular. It snaps at Mario and Luigi and can fire ice and fireballs, but what's really the most noteworthy here is how tenacious they are, constantly respawning during the final battle until you figure out you need a bit of Luigi logic to progress to the next phase. What I do think is kinda interesting though is that, as brought up earlier, Seedo counts as a gloam enemy, while these other solitary foes do not, despite being just as much associated with Reclusa as the wimpy Seeds. Perhaps it is the burrowing into the soil of the solitary that infects them with gloam? Although, by that logic, the Doom Bloom should also definitely have been gloam infected, you would think. But enough about what I think. What are your thoughts on the many enemies of Brothership? Which is your favorite and which do you dislike? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Mario content, Brothership and more coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.